This video essay analyzes the very first scene, the so-called teaser, of HBO's groundbreaking drama The Wire. It consists of 3 parts. First, a comparison of an earlier draft of the script and the end result, looking at the changes that were made to the dialogue and scene descriptions. Second, the essay examines the visual realization of the scene, the interpretation of the script through cinematography, acting and editing. Finally, the essay considers how the scene serves to foreshadow ideas explored throughout the series. Thus, while the 2 first parts focus on questions of craft, the third part looks at how key themes are introduced so that the scene comes to resonate with meaning beyond its literal content.
See, the king, stay the king, right?
The draft is dated July 2001, while the episode aired in June the following year, but it's not substantially different from the end result. You'll immediately notice that some of the names have been altered. The character of Jimmy McNulty, for example, is called McArdle in this version. But the main difference is that the dialogue has been trimmed, cut down to the essentials of the scene. Still, The Wire is a show in which famously
all the pieces matter.
So it's illuminating to ponder the function of even minor adjustments. In this first part, I'll run the scene next to the script, highlighting the specific changes that were made, occasionally pausing for comment. Then in the second part, I'll run the scene again and delve more deeply into the details of its visual construction. The opening 15 seconds or so establishes a familiar scenario, a ghetto crime scene, and the episode hews fairly closely to the script. There is a rivulet of blood in which we see reflected the lights of emergency vehicles. There's a close shot of a body, the camera on ground level, though the face is in darkness, so we don't yet see the eyes locked in sudden comprehension. And we get no crumpled $10 bill by the victim's feet, which I think was a wise decision. It's the kind of heavy-handed symbolism that The Wire mostly did so well to avoid. To my mind, the idea that life is cheap doesn't need any visual emphasis here. There are, however, uniformed cops picking up shell casings and bystanders. On the other hand, the script suggests a continuous ground-level tracking shot, whereas the episode instead breaks down cinematic space through editing, conveying pretty much the same information by giving us various views of the crime scene, rather than a longer take of blood and body and casings and feet. Also, the early draft suggests the initial part of the exchange between McNulty and the witness is off-camera. Instead, we get only the first line off-camera and then a cut to an angle from behind the 2 characters, which locates them geographically in relation to the fragments of the crime scene we've just been presented.
So your boy's name is what?
Snot.
You call the guy Snot?
Snot Boogie. Yeah.
Snot Boogie.
This is typical of many of the changes to the script, removing inessential information to make the conversation maximally expressive and concise. This is where the script has the low-angle scan of the terrain come to an end, and the camera is supposed to reveal McNulty. The reveal on the next line is instead of his face, not his figure. Note also that the draft describes the victim as nervous, which is not really how he comes across in the scene. I'll come back to this shortly.
You like the name?
What?
Snot Boogie. This kid whose mama went to the trouble of christening him Omar Isaiah Betts?
McNulty does not check his notepad, which doesn't slow down the scene or break the rhythm of his monologue. Note also that all such gestures reveal character. Had McNulty checked his notepad to retrieve the name of the victim, he'd come across as perhaps slightly less prepared or professional or invested.
This kid whose mama went to the trouble of christening him Omar Isaiah Betts? You know, he forgets his jacket. So his nose starts running, and some asshole, instead of giving him a Kleenex, he calls him Snot. So he's Snot forever. Doesn't seem fair.
Life just be that way, I guess.
This line is typical of The Wire's facility for a kind of low-key lyricism, for bringing out the rugged eloquence, wit and wisdom of street talk. Semantically, the sentence "life just be that way, I guess" doesn't mean anything other than the more familiar "that's life." But it's vastly richer, more poetic and melancholy. Note also the difference made by the insertion of the adverb just, which makes the line so much more melodious, while at the same time lending it a certain stoicism. There's a gracefulness and an elegiac quality to the utterance, which to my ears simply doesn't go with jitteriness, which is one reason I believe it benefits the scene, that it disregards the script's instruction that the witness be nervous. Like the $10 bill, it would have pushed the scene more in the direction of cliché. It would have rendered the stakes more visible and locked the characters to stereotype. The detective looking for information to solve the crime versus the high-strung and reluctant witness. The lack of apprehensiveness on the witness's part, on the other hand, makes the exchange more intriguing, implying that this kind of conversation is almost routine, and audiences today know the rules of the street anyway, so it's not necessary to call attention to the dangers of snitching. It's more interesting to draw on the audience's foreknowledge and let us fill in the gaps ourselves.
So, who shot Snot?
Here the draft has the witness simply shooting McNulty a look, the implication being that they both know that's obviously not something he's prepared to divulge, whether he saw who did it or not. Then comes further scene descriptions that have been dropped, of the two watching as the morgue attendant rolls Snot Boogie's body and the witness wincing, which McNulty takes to mean that he must have had some measure of affection for Snot Boogie, and so he tries to tease out information by playing on these sympathies. This has been cut, however, so any affinity with the victim is rendered more implicit. Thus, rather than the script's intermission, the episode as filmed jumps straight to the witness's refusal.
I ain't going to no court.
And instead of staring at the witness, waiting, McNulty stares into space and shifts his body.
Motherfucker ain't have to put no cap in him, no.
Definitely not.
Man, he could have just whipped his ass like we always whip his ass.
I agree with you.
He gonna kill Snot. Snot been doing the same shit since I don't know how long. Kill a man over some bullshit.
We see two McNulty lines have been cut here. He no longer encourages the witness to talk by asking him directly to expand on what he means by bullshit. Instead, he seems to catch on to the witness's sympathy for Snot Boogie and his anger at the senselessness of his murder. We see him coming to realize that the best thing for him to do is just to be quiet and let the witness keep talking. This works much better without McNulty actively goading the victim, without the clunky line from the draft, "You liked him, didn't you? You kinda liked the guy," and without the witness wincing at the sight of Snot Boogie's dead body. There's just so much more going on in the scene now, between the lines, so much more for us to engage with when the information is offered subtly and organically, instead of coming up with these awkward ways of telling us what is going on inside the mind of the witness.
I'm saying. And every Friday night, we're in the alley behind the cut rate, we rolling bones, you know? I mean, all the boys from around the way, and we roll till late.
Alley crap game, right?
Like every time. He Snot. He'll fade a few shooters. Play it out to the pots deep. Snatch and run.
What, every time?
Couldn't help himself.
Let me understand you. Every Friday night, you and your boys will shoot crap, right? And every Friday night, your pal Snot Boogie. He'd wait till there was cash on the ground, then you'd grab the money and run away? You let him do that?
I mean, we'll catch him and beat his ass, but ain't nobody never go past that.
I gotta ask you, if every time Snot Boogie would grab the money and run away, why'd you even let him in the game?
What?
With Snot Boogie always stole the money. Why'd you let him play?
Here's another look in the draft that has been dropped.
Got to. This America, man.
Now let's rewind the scene and look more closely at its visual realization. I should note that though I look at script adjustments first and then at how the script is brought into being, the writing and the shooting are, as we'll see, intertwined. The main deviance from the script in the portrayal of the crime scene is the decision not to use a longer ground-level tracking shot, which would have been somewhat more challenging to choreograph. It might be that the decision to go for a more conventional approach was made for pragmatic reasons, with a view to the budget or the shooting schedule. But it's also worth noting that the visual instructions in the draft would not have conformed with the style that eventually came to characterize The Wire, an inconspicuous aesthetic that emphasizes the qualities of performance and dialogue without calling too much attention to itself. A more complex roaming camera move would have made for a much flashier lead-in and signaled a very different kind of series than The Wire ended up being. So instead of a low-angle scan across the terrain, we get a straight cut to an angle from behind McNulty and the witness that also serves as an establishing shot, providing a wider view of the crime scene while also letting us know where the two characters are in relation to it. A more visually flamboyant show might have the camera move around the characters as they're talking to reveal their faces. Instead, we get a cut to an angle just in front of the characters, followed by an ever so slight reframing, to end up on a mid-sized two-shot, a much favored composition in The Wire, which in this case at least, lets us take in the facial expressions and the body language of two characters at the same time, instead of cutting back and forth between close-ups of both. McNulty then passes the ball over to the witness.
Snap Boogie. You like the name?
What?
Snap Boogie.
Here we get a cut to a slightly more distant framing from the opposite angle on the witness's side. McNulty tries to engage him, but is granted only a shrug. So he embarks on his musings on the origins of the nickname Snot Boogie. Then the camera reverts to its previous position, to McNulty's side, who keeps trying to ingratiate himself by being amusing, then testing his hypothesis that the witness had sympathies for the victim, simply by offering the observation that it
doesn't seem fair.
Here he tries to pass the ball over once more, and so we cut back to the angle with the witness in the foreground, who once more declines to engage, but at least offers,
Life just be that way, I guess.
McNulty sizes up the situation, realizing that the witness is not about to volunteer any information, but he hopes he's gotten on his good side and decides to just come out with it and asks him bluntly,
So, who shot Snot?
Everybody knows this is what McNulty really wants to know. This is what it's all about, the dramatic high point. So we get a close-up. There's a cut to the reverse angle, also in close-up, as the witness immediately pushes back.
I ain't going to no court.
So this time the witness does engage. It's the first time he doesn't simply stare into space, but turns towards McNulty. But it's a defensive maneuver, a way to fend off an attack, so to say. The detective has danced around a bit and then thrown a punch, which the witness parries at once. So we get this wonderful shot, which breaks the pattern, a frontal, more distanced two-shot, suggesting a stalemate. McNulty looks dejected, realizing that he didn't get anywhere. He needs to regroup and raises his head, as if thinking to himself, now what? Another cut takes us back to the more angled two-shot from the beating around the bush part of their conversation, suggesting that McNulty is about to have another go. There seems to be a slight continuity error here. In the previous shot, he looks into the distance somewhat across the victim. In the shot that follows, however, he looks down and his head is not turned. Still, this two-shot really pays off. We see the witness impassive in the foreground, seemingly just waiting for the conversation to finally come to an end. And in the background, we can practically see the gears turning inside McNulty's head. He needs to come up with a different approach, and he starts to shift his body like a cat preparing to pounce. Then comes a slight twist. It turns out that McNulty did manage to stir something and to form some kind of connection. At least the witness does start talking.
Motherfucker ain't have to put no cap in him, no.
He's not providing the information that McNulty is looking for, and initially the detective is merely playing along, and looks slightly distracted.
I don't know how long. Kill a man over some bullshit.
But notice how the word bullshit focuses his attention. Again, we see the gears turning inside his head. So, a kind of intimacy has been established, and we get another close-up. For the second time, the witness makes eye contact, but this time it's not to stand his ground, but to actually engage in conversation.
Alley crap game, right?
Like every time. He snot and fade a few shooters. Play it out to the pots deep. Snatch and run.
And we get a close-up of McNulty to highlight his genuine curiosity when he learns of the weekly beatings of Snot Boogie. This is followed by a frontal close-up of the witness, a wistful expression on his face, underscoring that he did indeed have some affection for the victim, and is appalled at the absurdity of the killing. This might have been an opportunity for McNulty to press the witness for information about the identity of the shooter, but his inquisitiveness gets the better of him.
And every Friday night, your pal Snot Boogie, he'd wait till there was cash on the ground, then you'd grab the money and run away?
The rest of the exchange is devoted not to the investigation, but to understanding this strange ritual that used to play itself out every Friday night in that back alley.
If every time Snot Boogie would grab the money and run away,
Why'd you even let him in the game?
What?
With Snot Boogie always stole the money. Why'd you let him play?
Got to. This America, man.
Here, too, the close two-shot really bears fruit. We see simultaneously the witness out of focus in the foreground as he offers his eccentric reasoning while staring thoughtfully into space, and behind him McNulty in full focus, his bewildered reaction to the utterance, in stark contrast to the high pathos and full seriousness of the delivery. Only now do we get the shot that the draft places before the conversation starts, of the victim's face with eyes locked in sudden comprehension. The juxtaposition of the witness's declaration that this is America and the image of Snot Boogie's dead body suggests that The Wire will not present a rosy and hopeful portrayal of modern-day America. The camera then racks focus, and we see McNulty still trying to stifle a giggle in a shot that has a nice rhyming effect with the opening image of the two characters. This gives a certain unity to the opening scene, which is appropriate in the sense that the investigation of Snot Boogie's killing is quite incidental to the series. It's more than just an anecdote, however, or a way to introduce us to McNulty. It actually appeared first in the non-fiction book Homicide: A Year on the Killing Streets, written by The Wire's creator David Simon. In fact, several incidents, characters, and conversations from this book, and from his next one, The Corner, make their way into The Wire. In Homicide, the story of Snot Boogie is indeed an anecdote, told by Detective Terry McLarney towards the end of the book. But in The Wire, this incident has been recontextualized and repurposed. It's been placed right at the start, and though it's unrelated to the plot of the series, it shrewdly prefigures key themes, which brings us to the third and final part. Most obviously, there's the idea of America that the witness invokes. Throughout its 5 seasons, the concept of the American dream serves as the backdrop for The Wire's bird's-eye view of Baltimore. This is the notion that there's something historically unique about the United States, that its founding represented a new beginning of freedom and opportunity for all. The various components and contradictions of national mythology are constantly exhibited and critically examined in The Wire. The series exposes the discrepancy between rhetoric and reality, showing that opportunities are painfully unequally distributed, and that all the familiar obstacles to social mobility are there in full measure.
You got money, you get to be whatever you say you are. That's the way it is.
Oh, sir, I'm sorry. These are the samples.
The most persistent counterweight to the American dream is the series' central metaphor of the game, initially used to describe the practices and procedures of the drug trade.
Look, man, I do what I can do to help y'all. But the game is out there, and it's either play or get played.
The metaphor is in strong tension with ideas of freedom and the pursuit of happiness because it suggests that there are unwritten rules that constrain the characters. Time after time they invoke, often in highly ambivalent ways, the tautology that the game is the game as a kind of invisible force beyond their control. In one memorable scene later in the season, some of the analogies are made explicit, as D'Angelo Barksdale explains the rules of chess to some of his underlings by reference to the world they know, powerfully conveying that some pieces on the board are inherently more valuable than others. What is arguably most striking, however, is the inability or unwillingness of his audience to face these ruthless realities. Bodhi here recognizes that in this parable he's a pawn, that most expendable piece, but he does not shake his faith in the key tenet of the American dream, that each individual is the architect of his or her fortune.
All right, but if I make it to the end, I'm top dog.
Nah, yo, it ain't like that. Look, the pawns, man, in the game, they get capped quick. They be out the game early.
Unless they some smart-ass pawns.
It's the same paradox that makes itself felt in the opening scene. In both cases, people from poor neighborhoods, those who have in effect been left behind, whose options are essentially either taking a low-paid job or entering some shadow economy, nevertheless cling to some fuzzy, lofty ideal embodied in the concept of America about fairness, equality, and opportunity.
Got to. This America, man.
It's typical of The Wire's fatalistic outlook and its ties to tragedy that insights arrive too late. Here Bodhi has come to realize that the game is not set up for him to make it.
This game is rigged, man. We like them little bitches on the chessboard.
Pawns.
By this time, he's prepared to be a witness, not knowing that his own tragic fate has already been sealed, that Stanfield knows and is about to have him killed. Indeed, as The Wire season by season unfolded ever more sections of Baltimore, what gradually came into view was an image of the modern metropolis as a kind of city machine. I'm often reminded of the dystopian imagery of Fritz Lang's Metropolis, though much more abstractly, of course, with institutions and environments like big interlocking wheels that set in motion some apparatus beyond the control and understanding of any component part. And individuals are mere exchangeable pieces, like Charlie Chaplin's factory worker in Modern Times, swallowed by the machinery, and those who seek to change the rules are invariably spat out and eventually replaced by some less obstinate cog. It's The Wire's outrageous ambition to give us a glimpse of the totality of the machine through its omniscient narration, to show how various institutional practices make a certain amount of sense from within each limited perspective, but also how these institutional practices are interlocked in ways that are in fact destructive at the level of society as a whole. The war on drugs, for example, is clearly portrayed as deeply flawed, both failing to reduce the sale and use of narcotics and to understand the causes, resting on the premise that those who enter the game are somehow morally flawed, that it's they who betray America rather than the other way around. This theme of institutional dysfunction also resonates in the opening scene, at least retrospectively. Snot Boogie 2 was part of a game, literally a game of craps, with a predetermined outcome that benefited no one. Him snatching the money, then taking a beating, like some theater of the absurd. Like the war on drugs, it's a senseless ritual that simply played itself out every Friday night, with no recognizable logical purpose, propped up only by a misguided notion of the American dream.
Over the top, gentlemen!
All told, the 2 minutes and 44 seconds that kick off The Wire is both a finely crafted standalone scene and a kind of multi-layered parable that reverberates across some 60 hours of television. This is characteristic, more generally, of the show's facility for putting carefully manufactured moment-by-moment drama, frequently lifted from first-hand observation, in the service of profound social analysis. That is what makes The Wire the most improbable of creatures, a blend of engaging entertainment and fierce system critique, that 18 years after its premiere remains a singular achievement in the context of commercial television.